By the way, I'm Becky Hogue, and my parents started Books Between Bites. We're in our 37th year with almost a whole 2 years that we had to cancel. So we're glad. And Lester and I kept in touch, and we had to cancel him twice because of COVID, and so we're thrilled to have him back. My father found Lester at the homestead several years ago when he was visiting his parents who lived there, and then my parents lived there. And may I say, your father helped create the homestead in Batavia.
Right.
With Mr. Exdam.
Harry Exdam.
Harry Exdam and Lester Munson Sr. were instrumental in getting the homestead in Batavia. So he has even closer ties than you think, not just Books Between Bites. Anyway, we are thrilled to have Lester here. I know you're sports fans if you're here today. And one last thing, I have a clipboard over here if you'd like to be on our mailing list, email list for monthly notices. Just sign up on that clipboard over there. And there's also some programs for the rest of our season. And we have a website that you can get more information about all of our speakers. So, Lester, come on up.
Thank you, Becky. I am really happy to be back here. You know, when you're a guy like me and you're as insecure as I am and you get canceled 3 times by Books Between Bites, you know, you start to wonder about yourself. But I finally figured out it was COVID. It is so cool to be here. I've only been here 25 minutes, and I've already received tips on 3 major sports books that I'm going to follow up on. Catherine gave me 2. I've got another one about Tim Donaghy, a referee that I reported on. This is a highly literate group, unlike a lot of sports audiences, I might say. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 books. Rethinking Fandom by a guy named Craig Calcaterra, Glory Days by John Wertheim, a former colleague of mine at Sports Illustrated, and All In, an autobiography by the great Billie Jean King. The first we'll take a look at is this, Craig Calcaterra, Rethinking Fandom. In this book, he tries to explain to sports fans some of the problems of the sports industry. He does a very good job. I spent 32 years of my life doing the same work, so as I go through this, I find small errors that wouldn't bother you, but they bother me. And then he occasionally, he had trouble with the word principal. He couldn't tell the difference between the principal of the school and the principle of science. But other than that, it is a very interesting book. He keeps referring to what he calls the sports industrial complex. This goes back to the President Eisenhower's farewell address, beware of the military industrial complex. So right away when you see him using this phrase, sports industrial complex, you know he's sending out warnings about things you should keep track of. He starts out with a recitation of many of the problems in the sports industry. Players who are arrested for beating their wives or girlfriends, the use of steroids and other performance-enhancing drugs. He has a wonderful description of Kevin Durant, probably the best professional basketball player, well, maybe LeBron James, but one of the top 5 professional basketball players right now, and Kevin is prone to homophobic and misogynist rants. And what do you do with a guy like him? Well, they pay him $30 million and they let him play. That's what they do with him. He talks about the Warpath music that is in the stadium of the Atlanta Braves and other Native American caricatures that we have had in the sports industry. He has a good section on how women are paid lower than men, particularly in the individual sports. Serena Williams, Megan Rapinoe, the soccer player, we know that they are getting less money than their counterparts who are actually worse players than they are among the ranks of men. He also explains how few blacks and Latinos are in management and ownership of professional sports teams. He has a nice account of the Houston Astros cheating their way to the World Series win in 2017. He explains what happens in the Final Four coming up in a couple of months here. The NCAA takes in $1 billion and the players basically walk away with nothing, although now some of the players are able to make money selling their name, image, and likeness. He has a good section as well on violence in professional football, concussions, and the lasting damage it does to the men who play in that league. As he describes the sports industrial complex, one of the first and most important things is how team owners seek public money when they are rehabilitating or building a new stadium. The team owner tells everybody, let's say here in the Chicago market, that if you build me a stadium, it will boost the local economy. It will make us a so-called big league city, and then they threaten to move elsewhere. We went through this several years ago with Jerry Reinsdorf and the Chicago White Sox. He wanted a new stadium. The political leaders, including Governor Jim Thompson at that time, could not imagine losing a team from our city while he was leading the state of Illinois. Reinsdorf threatened to move to Tampa Bay, and he managed to get a stadium where the White Sox are now. It's known as Guaranteed Rate Stadium. Guaranteed Rate is a mortgage company run by a guy from Oak Brook, and he paid $10 million each year to put his name on the stadium. I know he feels better about that. I'm not sure about the rest of us going to Guaranteed Rate Stadium.
With the arrow down.
Yeah, right. With the arrow down, that's right, for lower rates. Yeah. But in that case, Reinsdorf worked. The whole scheme worked for him. There was considerable public money put into the stadium, and the White Sox are now a tenant paying money to the Illinois Sports Facilities Authority, which was organized to build the stadium. And as a tenant, they pay almost no rent. If a light bulb goes out, the Sports Facilities Authority replaces the bulb, not the White Sox. It's the reverse of a usual lease. All the advantages are with the tenant, and all the disadvantages are with the landlord. It's an upside-down lease. If attendance goes below a certain number, the Sports Facilities Authority pays the White Sox a subsidy to make up for the lost fans. So that's the model of a stadium scam. Lately, there are fewer and fewer of those. In the book, the writer Calcaterra just has a great history of the successes and failures of other stadiums. Glendale, Arizona, borrowed a lot of money to build a stadium for the National Football League Cardinals. They are losing money each year on that, and the city ultimately will face insolvency. The same city built a stadium for the hockey team, the Coyotes, and before they could even begin to even things out, the Coyotes left the stadium for another one. They did one thing that has worked, and that is that Glendale built a spring training facilities for the White Sox. That is doing well because spring training has become a hugely profitable thing both in Arizona and Florida. Another example that he describes is the new Atlanta Braves Stadium. It is known as White Flight Stadium. They didn't want to be downtown in Atlanta where there was majority black folks, so they moved to Cobb County, Georgia, and they built a stadium with a lot of public money so that they could move into a new stadium. The old stadium was in perfectly good shape, was actually an interesting ballpark. But now Cobb County has figured out that they issued $400 million in bonds. Each year, when you have $400 million in bonds outstanding, you must pay the interest on the bonds. That was supposed to be paid by a sales tax increase in Cobb County, and already, in only 3 years, they are way behind. The sales tax does not pay the interest on the bonds, and they have had to cut the budget for libraries and parks in order to pay for the Braves fields. We can't talk about this without talking about Destiny's darlings, the Chicago Bears. They are in the process of moving to Arlington Heights. You don't have to worry about whether they are going to move. They will move. You can count on it. They should have done this a long time ago. They will build a stadium that will cost in excess of $2 billion. It's going to take a few years. I'm 82 years old. I do not expect to be in this stadium. They will move to Arlington Heights, and they are doing this for a number of reasons. First and foremost, Soldier Field is the worst stadium in all of professional sports. It is impossible to get to. It has almost no amenities. It is too small. It is the smallest stadium in the National Football League. Will Arlington Heights do what Glendale, Arizona did and help them build a stadium? My guess is they will, but not to the same extent. The Bears can easily build this stadium by themselves. They do not need any public money. There's a bank that has been financing stadiums in the National Football League, and the Bears will have access to hundreds of millions of dollars from that bank. The Bears are in a great position because they are the only professional football team here in this market. We should have 2 teams here. There should be another team prompting the Bears to try to win a few more games. But way back when, George Halas, the founder of the Bears, managed to drive the Cardinals out of town to St. Louis and then to Arizona. So the Bears are in a terrific position, and they should have built this a long time ago. They will build a stadium like the one in Las Vegas, which was about $2 billion, had some public money. It will not be as big as the stadium in Dallas or the stadium or SoFi in Los Angeles, for those of you who watch these games on television. But they are going to move. They will keep the name Chicago. Half of the teams in the National Football League are already in places that are not connected to the name. New York Giants, Dallas Cowboys, New York Jets, etc. The Washington Commanders, as we now know them. Another good thing that Calcaterra does in the book is he describes how these ballparks in professional sports are gentrifying. Going to games becomes more and more expensive. The teams are aiming to sell tickets to the 1%. They are catering primarily to wealthy fans. There are new amenities in these new ballparks for the premium seats. The new Yankee Stadium has seats where you pay $2,600 for one game. $2,600 for one game. Unbelievable. And there they bring you the food, they bring you the beer, they bring you everything you want, and there's a wall around these seats to separate the rich folks in those seats from the rest of us. Gentrification of a ballpark. The NBA, the Golden State Warriors, are in a new arena in San Francisco. Previously, when they were in Oakland, the highest price for a seat at a game was $370. I thought that was pretty high. Now in the new venue, in order to buy season tickets, you pay what is called a seat license, $36,000. $36,000 gives you the right to then pay for game tickets. And game tickets, many of them are in the range of $600 per game. The Dallas Cowboys Stadium, which you see on television almost every week, it's a $100,000 for the privilege of buying a season ticket. You know, you look at this, who are these people? I mean, if you know somebody with season tickets anywhere, you know somebody who is in the 1%. They may be disguising it from you, but you know somebody who's in the 1%. The other thing, quite interesting to me, that he points out in Rethinking Fandom is many teams are in the business of losing. They are not, their business goal is not to win games. They are more interested in the real estate development around the team. They have, if we just take a look at the Chicago Cubs, my favorite team, Tom Ricketts, the owner, has spent the last 2 years focusing on building a sports bookmaking operation that will be part of the Wrigley Field experience. They are not paying a lot of money for players until just recently, but he was busy building all sorts of amenities around the ballpark so that he's making money off his real estate and off gambling, and not because they're winning games. And for him, it's working out very well. There is some hope now that they are going to go back to trying to win. We'll see how that works out. There are other teams who are losing. It's called tanking. They are deliberately losing or not playing competitively in order to have a high draft choice for the incoming college players. Teams build up by drafting college players, by drafting young baseball players, and the higher your pick, supposedly the better the player you're going to draft. The Chicago Bears right now will have the #1 selection in the upcoming National Football League draft. As a Bears fan throughout my life, I am not real happy about that. I know they're going to screw it up. The last time they had a good draft was when in a single year they drafted Dick Butkus and Gale Sayers. It's been all downhill, and that was 35 or 40 years ago. I can't pinpoint the year, but Dick Butkus would fit right in with this audience here, if you get my drift on how long ago this was. So that we have losing because you're focusing on real estate development, and losing because you're looking for a good draft pick. He also tries to do a chapter on the history of labor unions in sports. He does a good job. It could have been a lot better. I spent 32 years following the labor unions in professional sports, and it's a fascinating thing to watch. I'll give you one example. In 1994, the owners of Major League Baseball decided they were going to break the Players Union. The Baseball Players Union is the single most successful, the richest, and the most powerful union in the history of American labor. Under American labor law, I could spend an hour explaining this, but under American labor law, it is totally impossible to break a union. The law is biased for the unions and against management, and the unions are totally protected. But these owners somehow got together and said, all right, we are going to eliminate all the things that have made baseball salaries so high. And so they pushed the players, and they went out on strike in August of '94. No one expected this, but the World Series that year was canceled This was a particular blow to White Sox fans and to fans of the Montreal Expos, who easily could have been in that World Series. But ultimately, the situation ended up in court in New York City. This was just before spring training of the next year, 1995. I can recall vividly sitting in the jury box in this courtroom watching the owner's lawyers and the players' lawyers. And the owner's lawyer tried to explain how salaries and spring training conditions and renewal of contracts were not part of American labor law, which is for wages, hours, and working conditions. As he offered this explanation, you could see that the judge was trying to stifle a laugh. She's like this. And at one point, she got up and left the bench and went back into her office to compose herself. And she came back out and she made her ruling 100% for the players and against the owners. That was Sonia Sotomayor, now on the United States Supreme Court. Calcaterra in this book touches on some of this, but could have done a little better job on that chapter. But meanwhile, it's not really fair for me, who spent a lifetime working on this, to be making evaluations of what he is doing. Many people worry about the high salaries that baseball players and other professional athletes are receiving. They are receiving enormous salaries. It can be embarrassing. Hundreds of millions of dollars changing hands. We just had, I think, at least 8 or 9 $300 million contracts in baseball. That's guaranteed money. If those guys are injured and can't play, they still get the money. And it's very easy to get upset about that, but one thing to remember is this money is going to go either to the owners of the teams or the players. It can't go anywhere else. It's not going to go for the police department or for social service or for any of the things that we have problems that we need to solve. So if you have to pick between the owners and the players, my pick will always be the players. So I try not to object to some player making a big score in a $300 million contract. Another thing that he points out brilliantly in here, at almost every professional sports game, you will see veterans getting honored. There will be a stop in the game. There will be 3 veterans brought out on the field. They will receive a standing ovation, and there will be a tribute to the United States and to our military. He explains that the owners of the teams are getting paid by the Department of Defense to do these ceremonies for veterans. The Department of Defense is spending millions of dollars to stage these events. So for the owners of the team, it's not patriotism, it's profit. It's a revenue stream for them. For the veterans, it's a terrific day at the ballpark, no question about it. But it's supposed to be a recruiting tool. Young people see these veterans at the ballpark and they get interested in the Marines or the Navy and they sign up. And he does a terrific job documenting that phenomenon. His answer to the various grievances in the sports industry is to become a casual fan, to become a fair weather fan, to say no to your team, to say, all right, I've had enough, I'm going to change teams. All right, that all sounds very nice. I am a Cub fan. I cannot imagine doing any of that. I mean, there's no logic to this. My father was a Cub fan. I'm a Cub fan. I have 2 sons. They live in Prague in the Czech Republic and in Washington, D.C. They are Cub fans. And we're not going to change, no matter what this guy tells us. I'll give you an example. In my father's final days at Homestead, He was in bed. He was on morphine. The end, you could tell, was near. And one of my brothers, Eric, is talking to him as all of this is going on. And he says, "Pop, you must have gone to 1,000 Cub games." And my father's reply was, "No, it was 2,000, and don't tell your mother." Now, so I'm giving you a lukewarm recommendation to this book. It's for people who are, really seriously interested in sports. It's not a casual, fun read. This is the opposite. This is one of the best sports books in the last 10 or 15 years. I think I had this on the schedule for one of my cancellations at Books Between Bites. But Glory Days, from the Bruce Springsteen song, and it's by John Wertheim, who was a colleague of mine at Sports Illustrated. A terrific guy. His father is a professor at Indiana University. He is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and he is one of the great sports writers in America right now. And the title is Glory Days, the Summer of 1984, 90 Days That Changed Culture and Sports Forever. Why 1984? In 1984, Michael Jordan became a professional player and an Olympic hero. Fantastic accounts of that in here. It was also the year he signed with Nike, changing sports marketing forever. And he tells the story in here of how that took place. It's a well-known story. Sonny Vaccaro was the guy who connected Michael to Nike, who invented the term Air Jordan, and the rest has become the most successful thing in the history of retail America. And one of the people involved in this was a coach by the name of George Raveling. George Raveling is about 6'9", powerfully built guy, coached Iowa, coached other places, and he was an assistant coach when Michael was playing in the Olympics in '84. And it was George Raveling who brought Sonny Vaccaro and Michael together with Nike. Something I did not know until I read some of the detail in this book is fascinating. It's occasionally very gossipy, which I must admit I like. And George Raveling, for example, he's a well-known basketball coach. 1963, when Martin Luther King gave the I Have a Dream speech on the Mall in D.C., George Raveling was one of his 3 security guards. George Raveling was as big as a refrigerator, so I mean, he was the right guy. After the speech, George Raveling said to Dr. King, "May I have that manuscript?" And King handed it to him. And he has it. It's worth millions of dollars. And he has turned down various offers. There is apparently an effort now that he might send it to the Smithsonian Museum. It would be the African American Museum, the new one. And if it did land there, it would be the first thing from Dr. King in the museum. His family has fought off the museum all these years, so there's no King stuff in that museum. But George Raveling has been turning down offers. Oddly enough, the manuscript was pretty much a speech about jobs and job training. Behind Martin Luther King at the time was Mahalia Jackson, the great Chicago gospel singer. And she had heard King give the Dream speech in other venues. And as he starts talking about jobs, she says, "No, Martin, tell him about the Dream." And he did. And then you hear one of the greatest speeches of all time. In addition to Michael Jordan, 1984 We saw the emergence of ESPN as a powerful sports media company. The LA Olympics were a total success, the only Olympics that earned a profit. It was the year of the Karate Kid movie, which you may remember. That has led to the popularity of mixed martial arts and Ultimate Fighting Championships. These are brutal bouts that are on ESPN and other networks, but they're hugely profitable. I cannot watch one for a minute, but they have a great following. It was the year that Magic Johnson and Larry Bird played against each other in the NBA Finals, and it was the year that Martina Navratilova forever changed women's tennis. He tells all these stories with fantastic detail. I'll give you an example as he describes Martina playing tennis at a new level. She went to Wimbledon that year, never lost a set. And then John Wertheim, the writer, goes into terrific detail. He points out that at the time of Wimbledon, Martina had in her entourage a new girlfriend, a tall, gorgeous blonde named Judy Nelson. Judy Nelson, until she met Martina, had been the wife of a doctor in Houston and had 2 sons at home. So this was a delicious tabloid angle to Wimbledon that year. In addition, in her entourage, she had a dog walker. She had Renee Richards. Some of you may remember Renee was the first transgender athlete. She was one of Martina's coaches. She worked on Martina's serve. And she had in the entourage a dumpling maker. She's a Czech woman. She defected from the then Czechoslovakia, came here, and she had her own personal chef for Czech dumplings. I'd like to find that person. I'm a big fan of Czech dumplings. But Wertheim, as he's describing Martina, quotes a sentence from Frank Deford, the greatest sports writer of our generation. Deford watches all this, and what he said in an article in Sports Illustrated was, to have achieved so much, triumphed so magnificently, yet always to have been the other, the odd one, alone, left-hander in a right-handed universe, a defector, gay in a straight world. Can't she ever get it right, he says. John also has a terrific description of Donald Trump attempting to buy a National Football League team. And the more Trump tried to sell himself to the league, the worse it got. Can you imagine this? They caught him in numerous lies, talking about himself and his finances, and so they turned him down. The National Football League owners were way ahead of the rest of us, apparently. This was also the emergence of the first Apple Mac computer, and then my favorite, in the story of 1984, this was a Cubs winning season. This was the Ryne Sandberg team, Rick Sutcliffe, and Gary Matthews, and those guys in 1984. He has a wonderful description of what we have come to know as the Sandberg game. Cub fans know exactly what I'm talking about. Wrigley Field, the 9th inning, Cubs are down 9-8. The Cardinals bring in Bruce Sutter, maybe the greatest closer of all time. He had a pitch, a forkball, which would come in and drop several inches in 1 or 2 directions. A guy who was almost unhittable. Ryne Sandberg comes up against Bruce Sutter and hits a home run into the street and ties the game. Now we're in the 10th inning. The Cardinals score 2 runs. Sandberg is up again in the bottom of the 10th. Bobby Dernier on first base, and he hits another home run off Bruce Sutter. Impossible to imagine or to comprehend. The Cubs finally won in the 11th, and Sandberg that day, 5 hits, 2 home runs, and 7 RBIs. One of the greatest days in Cubs history, and it made Sandberg into the most valuable player in the league that year and a first ballot Hall of Famer. The reporting and the writing and the detail in this book are just overwhelming. It's a perfect gift for anybody even mildly interested in sports. There's a lot of other culture in here, music, technology, all the things that happened in 1984, Bruce Springsteen, Prince, all sorts, and it's brilliantly weaved together in a narrative that you just keep reading. Finally, this is the autobiography of Billie Jean King, one of the greatest tennis players of all time and a leading activist on women's issues. Now, I ordinarily do not recommend sports memoirs. If you find yourself in a bookstore looking at a sports memoir, think this to yourself. Before somebody writes a book, they should have read a book. That is my threshold for sports memoirs. So in other words, if you pick up a Pete Rose memoir, put it back down. Do not buy it. And there are others in that category. This, however, is a magnificent autobiography, memoir, very important in many ways. Her co-author was Jeanette Howard, a colleague of mine at Sports Illustrated and at ESPN. She and I did a project together involving a volleyball coach named Rick Butler, who is now operating here in Elgin, previously in West Chicago. We won some awards for that. She is a brilliant reporter and a brilliant writer, and Billie Jean, together with Jeanette, is an awesome combination. Early in life, Billie Jean King learned that she would not always be treated fairly. She had an elementary school teacher, who flunked her in phys ed because she used her quote-unquote superior ability during games. A tennis official once pulled her from a tournament picture because she was wearing shorts and not the little skirt that the girls were supposed to wear. As she rose in the ranks of young tennis players, she noticed that the boys were receiving free meals at the posh Los Angeles Tennis Club where she played, while she and her mother ate what they brought from home. On the international stage, she would see men win 8 times as much money as she won all these big tournaments. As she said, and she says in the book, even if you're not born an activist, life can damn well make you one. This is a vivid account of her rise to greatness in tennis and her struggle to attain equal treatment for women in a shockingly discriminatory sports world. There's a brilliant retelling of her Battle of the Sexes match with Bobby Riggs. Some of you may remember that. She trained hard. She was ready for the match. Bobby Riggs was a showman. He was doing it for the fun of it. He was teasing and taunting her, and it was wonderful to watch. Using her skills as a tennis player, she just ran him around the court. No matter where he was, she hit the ball elsewhere, and the poor guy, he barely was standing at the end. As they would say in the book, they became great friends over the next few years. Very interesting. She marched with Gloria Steinem. She went public about having an abortion early in life. She finally came out as a lesbian at age 51 after a huge struggle, which is described very nicely in the book. Perhaps more importantly, in the big picture of things, in 1972, it was she who testified in support of Title IX, which opened up the entire world of sports to young women. She was the most important witness. The guy who wrote Title IX, Birch Bayh, senator from Indiana, brought her on as a witness, and he viewed that as a turning point as that law was passed and signed into law by President Nixon. The most important moment in the history of women's sports, no question about it. This book is also a call to arms. She is worried that that things are beginning to kind of slide backwards. She's looking for leadership like she exhibited among younger women athletes. I don't think she sees any of it coming, and she's very worried about that. So she has a kind of a call to arms in the conclusion of the book. Okay, that's my 3 books. And we can take questions about anything. Catherine?
I have 2 questions from your first book, and they both have to do with the Bears. One is what's going to happen with the seat licenses that season ticket holders had to purchase a few years ago.
For Soldier Field.
Yeah, the other one I forget right now.
It's okay, I'm familiar. When they remodeled Soldier Field, this goes back 17, 18 years. The Bears played in Wrigley Field for a long time. They moved to Soldier Field, and then they managed to persuade Mayor Richard M. Daley, the second Mayor Daley, that they had to remodel the stadium. And so they put together this deal. They remodeled the place, and if you were a season ticket holder and you wanted to be a season ticket holder in the remodeled stadium, you paid $2,500 for the privilege of buying season tickets. It was at that moment that I terminated my season tickets. I had 8 tickets. It would have been, what, $20,000 to buy some tickets. So that's a very good question. What will happen? Will those people have to buy a new seat license in the new stadium? My guess is they do. I'm sure there's something in that contract that would allow the Bears to start over again and have seat licenses at a higher level. Now, given the Bears management, they may have screwed that up. So maybe unlike the Dallas Cowboys, they may have screwed this up, and maybe the seat license will continue. But I don't think anybody knows at this point. Way back.
Since the Bears get the first round draft pick, who determines the salary of the new player?
Good question. The Bears have the first round pick. What determines the salary of the player that they draft, if they draft a player on that pick? The collective bargaining agreement between the players' union and the owners of the teams has a schedule of what the rookie contract will be. It's a contract for 3 years, and the first round pick is at a specified level, the second round pick slightly lower, and so on down the line into the second round. So the top 64 picks are on a schedule, and you can bargain, a player can bargain a little bit within that schedule, or he can say he's not going to sign and try to get moved to another team. But the player has very limited leverage at that point in his career. Later on, as a free agent, they have big leverage. But keep in mind, a professional football player, the average career is 3.5 seasons, very short. And although the quarterbacks make lots of money, the other players do not.
How do you feel about the Big Ten now being, what, the Big 14 or whatever it is?
Well, the Big Ten, it is the Big 14. It's hard to imagine that the Big Ten includes UCLA and Rutgers, but it does. And now they've just lost their commissioner. The commissioner is now the president and CEO of the Chicago Bears. It is actually, this is a big surprise. It's a good hire by the Chicago Bears. He will be in charge of building the new stadium. He did that for the Minnesota Vikings. He actually may know what he's doing, which is kind of a, I have to work on accepting that with the Bears. Susan.
I have been incredibly impressed with Megan Rapinoe and the other women's soccer players and what they've accomplished.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that they're going to continue to make a difference, or that other women are going to follow in their steps?
The Megan Rapinoe group has led the effort to get equal pay. And they filed lawsuits in Canada and the United States. They had great lawyers who have represented other players' groups, including the National Football League players. And they have a good settlement right now. The management of soccer, so-called USA Soccer, they're on the office is on the south side of Chicago. They have had very poor leadership. They've had, I think, 3 executive directors in 5 years. So right now the players are moving forward, doing well after years of ridiculously low pay. The women would always win and get 1/3 of the money of the men who always lost. It was an incredible situation. But right now they're doing well. However, knowing what we know about the sports industry, they have to stay with it, because the first chance management gets, they will again do something to take a crack at the women and their welfare. It's inevitable.
What are your thoughts on the NBA's relationship with China?
What are my thoughts on the NBA relationship with China? The commissioner of the NBA right now is a man named Adam Silver. He's about 6'7". He went to the same law school I did, the University of Chicago Law School, so I tend to be biased toward him. And he got the job the hard way. His father was a man named Ed Silver, a lawyer on Wall Street. And Ed Silver had, working for him on Wall Street, David Stern, who became the commissioner of the NBA. So when David Stern was looking for a successor, he said, I think I like Ed's son, Adam. And so he got the job. He did some heroic things early as commissioner. Remember the guy that owned the Los Angeles Clippers? He was a bigot and a misogynist, and Silver drove him out of the league. Yeah, it was a terrible thing what happened to that owner. He sold his team for $4 billion. Yeah, what a punishment. And then Silver got tangled up with China, and I think he probably made a couple of errors there, things he would like to take back. I actually do not know the current situation. They wanted to expand into China. I think that has been set aside, and probably more to come, but I don't have a real good grasp of the current situation. Okay. Oh.
What are your thoughts about the portal for college sports?
What are my thoughts about the portal? In college sports now, if you're a Division I scholarship athlete, you have a very good situation on your hands. You're going to get a college education. You will finish debt-free, and you're playing basketball and football in particular at the highest level. And for a long time, you could not transfer to another school. Well, you could, but you had to sit out a year, right, which at age 19 you don't want to be doing. So they changed the rules, and now at the end of a season, you can say, I'm going in the transfer portal. You can go to another school. And then, so all these kids line up in the transfer portal, and the coaches come looking, and they try to recruit the ones who have said we're going to transfer. So I'm anticipating some sort of scandal involving this very soon. It was a good idea. I think it's now, there's some abuse now going on. At one time, I worried about the welfare of Division I scholarship athletes. I thought they should be paid. I thought they needed more benefits. And now I have a grandson who is a Division I scholarship basketball player, University of Central Arkansas, which is where Scottie Pippen was. And as I see his life on that campus, I've got to tell you, it is a sweet life. It is a wonderful situation. I am no longer worried about these guys like I was. It's been a revelation to me, all the good things that happened to him in that situation. But the portal, it's the NCAA rule right now. It will be for a while, but I can see there's going to be trouble. I'm not sure what, but it's just moving in that, just by my reporter's instinct, I can see something might go wrong. But it's an interesting development, and there's so many kids go into that, you know, and then they might want to come back, and that's very hard for them. So, okay.
Well, Sam Hartman transferred from Wake Forest in the ACC to Notre Dame for his last year. Why? He only has one year of eligibility. He holds a lot of ACC passing records. He's going to transfer when Notre Dame lost their quarterback. Drew Pine is going to Arizona.
And I think Hartman is a graduate student, isn't he?
Yeah,
as well?
Like a 5th year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Notre Dame is Notre Dame. He may have thought the way to fame and fortune as a quarterback is to go to Notre Dame. It's certainly a reasonable position to take, although he probably would have been drafted out of Wake Forest if he took another year. Somehow he saw an opportunity at Notre Dame that when they lost their quarterback, he said, okay, this is for me. And no doubt there was some recruiting involving Notre Dame people coming to him and saying, here's what we can do.
Notre Dame's got nothing in the pipeline for a quarterback.
Well, then that's probably why he went, yeah.
Yeah.
So good for him, good for him.
Yeah.
Kids now, they can have an agent represent them in the portal. Earlier, you couldn't have an agent either. That's another major change. Okay, right behind.
What are some of your favorite non-sports books that you've read in recent years?
Well, I can tell you, I read a book, I'll give you my best example, Palace Papers by Tina Brown.
Oh my.
This is a wonderful journalistic look at the British royal family from the death of Diana until the death of Queen Elizabeth. It is brilliantly written, gossipy, all sorts of revelations about Prince Charles and Camilla and William and Kate. It's just it's a fascinating, well-done book that is well worth it. It's maybe 400 pages, and before you know it, you finish it. I wanted it to keep going. It was that good. And right now I'm reading Confidence Man by Maggie Haberman, the great New York Times reporter. It's a look at Donald Trump, and she has great detail. She knew him when he was a boy real estate developer in New York, and she takes the whole story and takes what you can easily imagine as a critical look at everything he did from his first hotel in New York until January 6th. So it's another good book, Confidence Man by Maggie Haberman. I also read a biography of John F. Kennedy, but I'm a sucker for anything involving the Kennedy family, so I'm not a good source on that. I'll read anything. Yeah, I have no standards. Okay, anything else? Oh, sure.
I should know this, but what has happened to the standards of education for these athletes? Do they actually go to school? Do they graduate? What kind of grades do they get? Or is it just do your duty and go to the pros?
A very good question. What happens in terms of the education of these Division I so-called student athletes? There is a very small number that play 1 year of basketball and then go to the pros.
They're all at Kentucky.
And yeah, and they're doing no academics at all, no question. Derrick Rose, Chicago kid, went to University of Memphis, and the story is he was never in class, not even once, and had somebody else take the entrance exam. But that's a very small number. There can't be more than 11 or 12 of those per year. If you look at a big football team, Michigan, Ohio State, they'll have 100 men suited up for the game. Of those, 85 or 90 are going to be students. They're interested. They're not going to play professional. There's a very small number of people who play, so they are in school, and many of them will go to graduate school, and they will do very well. And it's true in basketball too, although not so. But football, Northwestern University graduates every football player. It's unbelievable. Now, meanwhile, they won one game and lost 11. So it's a mixed blessing. But I think by and large, student athletes are interested in academics and they do reasonably well. We hear about the terrible cases like Derrick Rose, but those are not indicative of what goes on. I think it's better than the media, including me, would say. Yeah.
Thank you.
Catherine.
I have 2 comments and a question. My daughter Mary, born in '65, was the first little girl in Wheaton boys baseball, thanks to Title IX. And the next year they called it Wheaton Youth Baseball.
They had to.
Right. And a friend and her 2 daughters were at the Sandberg game.
At the
Sandberg game.
Oh, wonderful! The Sandberg game.
Yeah, the
I wish I'd
little
been there.
sister was begging for a Sandberg jersey rather than a T-shirt, and her sister said, "If the Cubs win, I'll get it for you."
Oh, knowing the Cubs had no chance.
Oh, right, because they were so far behind
Yeah.
from the beginning. And then the question is about the recent baseball lockout. You had said that the players won in '94, and how does that reflect on the owners' lockout?
The recent lockout was more successful for the owners than anything they had done. For a change, they had good advice, they followed it, and they executed a pretty effective maneuver. The Players Union is now already looking for ways to come back from some of the things they gave away this time. There's a long list, but in contrast to the entire history, which is all union and defeats for the owners, all of a sudden they had a good transaction. And I think ultimately it'll probably help baseball, but there is still incredible antagonism between the players and the owners. The players keep finding out that the owners are cheating them on various revenue things, and so there's no trust, there's no partnership. It's all antagonistic and adversarial. And that'll continue. And I'm not sure we're going to have a strike or a lockout, but it's going to be very hard bargaining for both sides. Okay.
A fashion question. Where's your black shirt and red tie?
So, somebody asked me that earlier. I'm branching out. I'm branching out. Yeah, I'm trying new things. Yeah. But thank you for asking. Okay, thank you very much.
Either one.